Elizabeth Taylor's 8 marriages and 7 husbands barely scratched the surface of how wild she really was. She was so scandalous that the US government held a meeting about her, and the Vatican issued a public statement. From one-night stands with presidents and senators to intense flings with Hollywood's biggest names, and all starting at a dangerously young age, Elizabeth became Hollywood's goddess of lust. Just how wild was she? This is the untold sex life of Elizabeth Taylor. At just 9 years old, Elizabeth Taylor became a frequent name in tabloids when she signed with Universal Pictures and walked straight into the spotlight like she was born in it. Little boys crushed on her, and girls wanted to copy everything she did. By the time she hit her teens, she had already turned into a Hollywood trademark, and many could already tell she was way too grown for her age. But no one knew what it was like to be Elizabeth away from cameras until Darwin Porter and Danforth Prince dropped their bombshell book, Elizabeth Taylor. There's Nothing Like a Dame, revealing her raw and wild side. The book caused a storm as Potter wrote Elizabeth's crazy confessions from a wild dinner at Tennessee Williams' house, and first-hand accounts of people closest to her, like her loyal assistant Dick Hanley and her longtime friend Roddy McDowell. The contents of this book are so unbelievable that they might pass as fiction. According to the authors, the sex-fueled drama around Elizabeth Taylor started before birth. On the first page of the biography, the author questions whether her birth father was American art dealer Francis Taylor or a British politician, Victor Cazalet. The same Cazalet was rumored to have something steamy going on with both of Elizabeth's parents, and even after the Taylors moved to Los Angeles during World War II, Cazalet still had power in their house. Back to Elizabeth, the controversial biography revealed that at just age 12, she had a very improper experience with John Derek, an actor and future director who was 6 years older than her. Still, she lost her V-card to actor Peter Lawford in the back of a limousine. As unbelievable as this may sound, it was reported that Taylor told onlookers to carry on, as if the moment were just another scene in a movie. The book also claimed that, even as a teenager, Elizabeth admitted to being physically mature and emotionally drawn to older men. When she was 15, she allegedly had a thing for future United States President Ronald Reagan, who was just 36 and already a known Hollywood figure at the time. So Elizabeth visited his room under the pretense that she wanted to do him a favor so she could get a movie role. Still a young teenager, she was so wild that she had to set the tempo of their meeting because he was hesitant. Surprisingly, that was far from her only escapade with a future US president. As Elizabeth entered adulthood, the spotlight got hotter as her private life spun wild, and the headlines couldn't get enough. MGM panicked and started trying to clean up her image fast. So, in the late 1940s, the studio rolled out a neat little romance with football star Glenn Davis. They pushed the story hard, claiming the two would marry after he returned from Korea, but the wedding never came, and the rumors never stopped. Despite how much the studio was trying to help give her good PR, Elizabeth would render their efforts useless when she suddenly announced she was engaged to William Pauley Jr., the son of a US ambassador. What made this announcement more jaw-dropping was that around the same time, billionaire Howard Hughes had proposed and offered her parents a fat check to seal the deal. Still, Elizabeth said no to Hughes and yes to William while in a supposed relationship with Glenn. Being raised on strict rules and MGM's tight grip, Elizabeth thought getting married early would give her freedom and her own identity, but she was nowhere near ready. At just 18, she finally tied the knot with Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., the heir to the hotel empire. MGM made sure the wedding was big, loud, and flashy with many cameras, stars, and fake smiles, but things soon got ugly fast while they were on their supposed honeymoon. According to the controversial biography, Elizabeth had steamy flings while on vacation, one with Prince Rainier of Monaco, who was already headed for the altar with Grace Kelly, and another with married actor Tony Curtis. By the time the newlyweds went home, the marriage had already turned dark. Nicky drank too much, hit too hard, and cared too little. Elizabeth quickly saw she'd made a mistake. Things got so bad that one of their usual violent scabbles ended in a miscarriage, and after just 8 months together, she filed for divorce, citing mental cruelty as her reason for wanting the split. In 1952, Elizabeth got married again to British actor Michael Wilding, who was 2 decades older than her. They quietly tied the knot at Caxton Hall in London, However, people did not know that her relationship with the veteran actor started years earlier during the filming of The Conspirator in 1942. She was just 17 then, but it did not matter to Wilding, and their relationship would remain hidden until they got married. Elizabeth might have thought he was more mature and could offer her the stability she wanted, but to Wilding she was just the right person to revive his dying career. He was ready to milk the attention that her scandalous lifestyle would bring. The couple had 2 sons before Elizabeth's 23rd birthday, but unlike what Wilding had thought, things were not going as planned, and if anything, his career began sinking even faster. Then he just stopped caring altogether. In 1955, the gossip magazine Confidential stirred trouble when it accused Wilding of hosting strippers at their home. He did not mind being sloppy since he knew he was already set for doom. It did not stop at the wild parties. Wilding was also cheating on Elizabeth with actress Stuart Granger. To everyone's surprise, while Wilding acted out, Elizabeth did not seem to care, as she was also in a passionate affair with Frank Sinatra. She was so head over heels for the musician that she wanted to force him into marriage by lying that she was pregnant. Sinatra, who was only there for the freaky moments, flat out told her that he was not ready to settle down and arranged for an abortion. Elizabeth and Wilding eventually announced their separation in July 1956, and then finalized their divorce 6 months later. Not long after the split, Elizabeth was 3 months pregnant when she married for the 3rd time to theater and film producer Mike Todd in Acapulco, Mexico, on February 2, 1957. Unlike her previous marriages, Todd truly loved and cared for Elizabeth, but the marriage was also short-lived because less than 2 years later, Todd passed away in a plane crash. His passing broke her so much that she remained bedridden for days. During this dark and messy time, her longtime friend Paul Newman, who had just married Joanne Woodward, kept showing up to check on her. But all of a sudden, he stopped seeing her and later admitted, "I found my sensory faculties the minute we left her home. I possibly couldn't change Todd. We have a full life of my personal, a wife, kids. I feared we horribly misled her. We can't function as the Mr. Elizabeth that is next, Taylor. I simply can't." Newman felt seduced and could not risk being around her any longer at the expense of his family. After Newman stopped visiting, Elizabeth's friend Debbie Reynolds had to step in, and she did with her husband Eddie Fisher. Still, during this period, loyalty meant nothing to the grieving Elizabeth, and not long after, she shocked everyone by starting a hot and wild affair with Eddie. The moment it hit the news, people went crazy. She was called a homewrecker. In an instant, Elizabeth completely burned the good girl image the studio had spent millions trying to preserve. She and Eddie married in Las Vegas on May 12, 1959. But even Liz later admitted that she was still drowning in grief and ran into Eddie's arms to escape it. As expected, Eddie couldn't stay faithful, and his drug problems only made it worse. However, none of that mattered to Elizabeth. She was already off the cold and empty marriage, and was said to have been sneaking around with none other than JFK. Kennedy was running for president then, and loved being the center of attention. He hung out with the biggest stars, Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, and yes, Elizabeth Taylor. With her sultry eyes, wild spirit, and sharp tongue, Liz was precisely the kind of woman he liked. The controversial biography claimed that one night, JFK took Elizabeth for a late swim in Robert Stack's pool, and that it ended in a steamy threesome, and since then, JFK was hooked. He couldn't get her out of his head. On the other hand, Liz liked how fast he talked, carried himself, and made big promises about changing the world. With time, they got closer, real close. Kennedy started calling her up whenever he was in Los Angeles, and soon he was inviting her to his private bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Elizabeth wrote in her diary about those moments. To her, they felt like soft and sweet breaks from the madness of fame. But to her friends, it looked like more. They said she lit up when JFK was around, like a girl with a crush who couldn't wait for the next visit. Elizabeth always swore their thing was just deep friendship. But not everybody believed that, and Jackie Kennedy didn't. A source told Radar Online that if Jackie hadn't gotten in the way, Elizabeth could have become a real part of JFK's tight Camelot inner circle, but Jackie wasn't having it. She was already dealing with too many women throwing themselves at her husband. Elizabeth was another name on a very long list. Around that same time, Liz dropped another bombshell when she told her friends of another threesome with legendary actor Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift. All these happened while her messy marriage to Eddie Fisher was still making waves, but that was nothing compared to what came next. In 1962, she met Richard Burton while filming Cleopatra in Rome. Despite his marriage, he could not resist her charms when he set his eyes on her. The duo couldn't keep their hands off each other, and when a sneaky paparazzo snapped a photo of them kissing like crazy on a yacht near Ischia, the world exploded. The scandal was so loud that even the Vatican called it erotic vagrancy. It even became a political headache, and some US politicians wanted her to be banned from returning to America. Elizabeth had become the poster woman for immorality, but she didn't care. She had always done what she wanted, and so was Richard. She finally cut ties with Eddie Fisher on March 5, 1964, when their divorce went through in Mexico. Just 10 days later, she was back in white, this time saying, "I do," to Richard Burton in a quiet but lavish ceremony at the Ritz-Carlton in Montreal. Their love was so strong that Richard even adopted Elizabeth's daughter, Liza Todd, and helped finish the adoption of Maria, a little German girl Elizabeth had started the process for while still with Fisher. The press couldn't get enough. Liz and Dick became the hottest thing on the planet. They made 11 films together and lived paparazzi-worthy lives with crazy spending that made headlines just as much as their sex appeal. They were probably the first Hollywood celebrities to prove that the messier your love life, the bigger your fame. However, all the attention they got came with a heavy cost. After 10 years of being the perfect toxic couple, they split in 1974. Then, like only Liz and Dick could, they shocked the world again by remarrying in Botswana just a year later. And just like before, it exploded. That second try crashed in less than 12 months, however. By July 1976, it was all over, at least on paper. Elizabeth never stopped craving him. She once said, "After Richard, the men in my life were just there to hold the coat, to open the door. All the men after Richard were really just company." However, the same could not be said about Richard. According to Darwin Porter's Elizabeth Taylor, "There's nothing like a dame." Richard Burton once confessed to her that he'd been introduced to gay sex by his mentor, Philip Burton, and over time, he had affairs with big names in British theatre, like Laurence Olivier, John Gielgud, and Noel Coward. After their first wedding, Richard frequently cheated on Elizabeth, like her past lovers. The book says Richard had an affair with architect Edward Tirella, and as usual, Elizabeth was aware and had a few flings of her own too. According to the author, the peak of their dark marriage was a particular night when Richard got drunk and then allegedly forced himself on Eddie Fisher as some sort of sick power move. Then he came back home to Elizabeth and bragged about it. There is also an account of when Elizabeth supposedly walked in on Burton and actor Peter Lawford going at it and didn't even flinch. After their final split, Elizabeth was no longer a regular actress, so she didn't return to Hollywood. Instead, she chose American politics. That's where she met John Warner, a Virginia Republican who had his eyes on the US Senate. They married on December 4th, 1976, and Liz threw herself into the campaign. At first, it was exciting, but once Warner won, life turned cold fast. DC wasn't Hollywood. The parties felt stiff, the people were boring, and Liz hated pretending to care. As time went on, she felt depressed and started taking heavy quantities of booze and pills for the thrill. The marriage slowly cracked. By 1981, they were done in everything but paperwork. The divorce finally came through in November 1982. After that quiet disaster, Liz bounced back to the world she knew, the Hollywood lifestyle filled with glamour, men, and a little danger. She had flings with George Hamilton and Anthony Gere, then got engaged a couple of times too, once to Victor Luna, a hotshot Mexican lawyer, and then to Dennis Stein, a New York businessman. Still, neither man made it to the altar. Then came the biggest surprise of all. In 1988, while getting clean at the Betty Ford Rehab Center, Elizabeth met Larry Fortensky, a construction worker who was more than 20 years younger. They fell hard, and on October 6, 1991, they married at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. In Elizabeth's usual fashion, the wedding was loud and very expensive. There was even an incident where a paparazzi parachuted just to snap a shot. Liz sold the wedding photos to people for $1 million and used the cash to launch her AIDS foundation. Sadly, the marriage ended after 8 years. She blamed her aching body and Larry's mental health for the split. The duo remained friends, despite ending their marriage. When he had a terrible fall in 1999 and ended up in a coma, she didn't think twice before paying the hospital bills herself. Even years later, they stayed close. In 2010, she sent him a sweet letter saying he would always be in her heart. Their last call was in February 2011, when he jokingly told her he thought she'd outlive him. Then a few weeks later, she was gone. But in one final act of love, Liz left Larry $825,000 in her will. In her final years, Elizabeth bonded deeply with actor Colin Farrell. They were not intimate in any form, but spent late nights on long calls talking about everything. As her health got worse, she needed help around the clock. On March 23, 2011, at 79 years old, Elizabeth Taylor died at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. After a very long battle against a heart ailment, and just like that, one of the wildest, boldest, sexiest lives in Hollywood ended. If you enjoyed this video, there's a good chance you'll enjoy the one on your screen right now. Click, enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you at the next one.